is we have new panelists on our panel, so I'd like to introduce them. On my immediate left, Joya Guerlazzoni, who is an editor and translator in Italy. She translates English fiction into Italian. Marc is an editor, literary agent, and also translator in France. And Bina Shah, beloved author, journalist, all-around cultural critic, and wonderful human being. The point of the panel is to actually partly to talk about the issues involved in shifting fiction, especially Pakistani fiction, into perhaps European context, foreign context, translation of Pakistani fiction into other languages, talk about the challenges involved, the issues involved, but also the ways in which European readers are interested in, are looking for fiction from the third world, especially from South Asia and especially from Pakistan. So I would like to turn it over to Marc. Perhaps we start with you, and then yes.
No, just hello, first of all, and I can't tell you how happy I am to be in Pakistan, thanks to the French embassy and to Martine, who's here, who organized all this, and the Alliance Française, because I have been working in publishing for a long time, but specifically about India and Pakistan for the last 15 years. I have a special connection with India, because my grandmother was actually a devotee for the Vedantic Sri Ramakrishna mission in New York and then in France. She spent 70 years there, and I was pretty much raised with the Gita, I have to say. So destiny had it that I was in a way doomed to serve India. And then, thanks to the mechanics of causes and effect, I got into discovering Pakistan and learning about the partition and discovering its culture. And ever since I did, I have devoted a lot of my time finding Pakistani authors to pass over to a French readership, and I actually started with the one who just blew my mind, literally, when I discovered him, when I read him, who's no else than Sahadat Hassan Manto, whom I published. Actually, I just had to do it. I was thinking that. I had to do it before I passed away, and if I did pass away, I was going to ask the Lord for 6 months, 8 months credit just for me to be able to publish Manto into French, which I did, and ever since I try to look for these Pakistani authors whom could whom I could pass on to a French readership. It's not easy, and it was not easy. I published apart from Manto, I published Daniel Muhanuddin, I published Kamila Shamsi, I published Atish Tassir and Fatima Bhutto, and despite the beauty, the power of all these texts. The passing over, the editorial passing over of them to a French readership was not easy because, unfortunately, of the image of Pakistan in the French readership, and I've never, been able to really sell more than 3,000 or 3,500 copies, although they deserved so much more and so much better. So today, I've come here to continue my work as an editor and as an agent, and to try to pass on in order to correct maybe the image of Pakistan in France, but to pass on its young talents and literary voices. I believe that Pakistani writers, just like Indian writers, stem out of the same fabulous and powerful narrative tradition of storytelling. And we need that. We need that in France. France has been undergoing a certain decline in its fiction ever since the Second World War, I believe. And the reason why it's turning towards foreign literature, American to start with, then South American in the 70s, and today more towards Asia, is because we are in need of storytelling and of refined and powerful storytelling. And I believe that Indo-Pakistani storytelling today, stemming out of 5,000 years of tradition in storytelling, is going to be the next very powerful literary voice in the West. So I am here to continue my work, and in India I would say to continue my dharma. Thank you.
Joy, can you talk a little bit about your work and your experience with Pakistani writers?
Yes. For me, it was pretty much the same, and I have to thank the Italian embassy and also the British Center for Literature Translation, because we did some workshops together. So for me to come to Pakistan was a dream, and actually we were exchanging emails with Marc saying, let's hope to manage to go to Pakistan this year, because we've been going to, I started going to India when I was 18. That was just for traveling, and I went once and I was addicted and I started going, and since I was studying translation, and I was actually physically bringing books back home and try to pitch them to translate to publishers when I finished my studies. And gradually I managed to pitch some books, and it grew and grew, and it was, of course, we were working, like 20 years ago, it was much different. But it was challenging and it was interesting. It still is, although the market has changed so much. But, the dream actually for me was to come here. And I met so many Pakistani writers, and I never actually worked on any Pakistani writer myself, personally, from English, but, I kept meeting them in festivals in India, and especially one of them who became a good friend, who's Bilal Tanvir, who is coming out, he had his novel published very recently. We developed a friendship, and I think the India connection we have, like with Marc, for instance, and with many other people, is such a strong bond, and for me it was so moving this year, because I was talking to all my friends like, I'm going to Pakistan, I'm so thrilled, I'm so happy, and they were staring at me and saying, we envy you so much, you can't imagine how lucky you are. And then I arrived in Lams and I went to Lahore. And so I was talking about, the Jaipur festival, the beauties of Jaipur and Delhi and the Purana Kila. And they were saying, you're so lucky. You can't imagine, we would love to be in Delhi. And it was very moving, because of course you read it in books, but then when you actually see your friends with starry eyes staring at you saying how lucky you are, and I know I'm lucky. So basically for me it was the same. I want to explore more, and I see like the subcontinent as a whole, and I know that from here, there has been amazing literature. There's going to be more and more amazing literature, also thanks to, more translations from local languages, which is something that we can talk about later. But for me, it's like it's an amazing territory to explore as a translator, as a scout.
Thank you. Pina, would you like to talk about the challenges of having your work translated into other languages, your experience of it and your work with it?
Sure. First of all, you'll have to excuse me if I'm a little hesitant when I talk because I wasn't expecting to talk about any of this today. I came to writing in a roundabout way in general. I wasn't expecting to be a writer. And I came to being translated also in a very roundabout way. I wasn't expecting for that to happen either. I had been living in Pakistan since 1995 and doing my thing, and I started to write, and then I started to write short stories. Then I wrote a novel, then another novel, another book of short stories, all published locally in Pakistan. The first by Oxford University Press. The next novels and the short stories were published by a publisher in Islamabad called Al-Hamra, which is no longer terribly active anymore. And after I got some experience with writing and being published in English, I thought that I should try and go out of Pakistan, go abroad, not go personally myself, but my books would go for me. So I set about looking for an agent, and that's a very torturous process for any writer. I found an agent in the UK, and I sent them the novel that I'd been working on at the time, Slum Child. And this was around 2006 or so. They loved it. They signed me on. They started sending, once we'd completed the book, they started sending it to UK publishers. At the same time, their sister agency started sending the book to European publishers. And to my absolute surprise, the book sold first in Italy, and then it sold in Spain, and then it sold in India. And it has not yet sold in the UK. So I tell you this story just to illustrate the roundabout way in which publishing can work, especially when you're going in translation. It's not necessary that first the English original manuscript will sell and then all the translations follow. At least that was my experience. To my absolute shock, the book did very well in Italy. It became a bestseller, and it sold about 25,000 copies as of this point. It's in 5 editions, and it's just last year went into a digital edition. Now that's it because it's going to be pirated. I've seen PDFs of it all over the internet in Italian, so I think that's the end of the book's life. But then it went to Spain, and then it sold. It didn't do as well in Spain as in Italy, but it did fairly well, and it also was being sold in South America and Central America. Every once in a while I get a reader writing to me from Venezuela or Guatemala and saying, I love your book, and it's always a shock. But it's just, I get tears in my eyes when I get those letters and those emails because it tells me how a book has a life and how a book travels. And I think that is the most thrilling part of being published in translation. You reach people that you never expected to reach. I thought I would be lucky if I could get translated in Urdu and actually reach my own countrymen and countrywomen. But instead, I'm hearing from people from all over Italy and all over, the Spanish-speaking world, and that's just thrilling. Besides the novel, 2 novels I've had translated into Italian. In fact, a second one called A Season for Martyrs, which was published, again, first in Italian. And it won a very small literary prize in Italy, so I think the Italians really like me. I don't know. And it's going to be published this year, at the end of this year, in the original English in which it was written. So again, it's not anything like what I expected to happen. But after that, and in fact, before the novel, I've had short stories translated into German, for example, and published in a literary magazine in Germany. I've had things translated into Vietnamese and Chinese in one of the southern Indian languages, Tamil. I had a short story translated and published in Denmark, in Danish. And so when these things happen, it just, for a writer, it's just the world expanding. It's just the world opening to you. And And you realize very quickly that you, especially if you're a Pakistani writer, you are an ambassador of your country to the world, because chances are they will not come to Pakistan, but they will learn about it through your book. And so it's a joy and a responsibility at the same time. You're presenting an aspect of your country, your experience of your country, not always a positive aspect of your country. Writers are not propagandists and they're not PR people, so we're not actually promoting Pakistani tourism. We're talking about where we live and the issues that we face and the problems that we face, and we're doing it sometimes in fiction, sometimes in nonfiction. And so the weight and the responsibility of that is quite heavy. And then when you think about the translations, and that responsibility and that weight expands and expands, but at the same time there is just the overwhelming joy of knowing that you are reaching people all over the world, and you are speaking to them, and they are listening, they're understanding, they're becoming curious, they're becoming excited. It's the best feeling in the world. That's all I can really say.
I think it's true. It's very important what Bina just said about the issues at stake today in Pakistan. You see, for a long time, I have believed that a lot in Asia, and especially in India, had to be the blueprint for the rest of the world, had to be the blueprint of the confirmed and beginning democracies, I would say, in the world. In other words, that Asia has a lot to teach to the rest of the world. And the West should listen. And the West also should open its ears and listen, because what is happening, especially to Pakistan today, might well one day happen to our own countries. And I think that the difficulties and the huge challenges that Pakistan is faced with today reveals an incredible courage, an incredible humility, and an incredible future, I think, for this country once it will have reached its level of serenity, if I may say. But what is happening today in Pakistan is reflected by its writing, is reflected by its writers, and should definitely teach us something in the West, and will. And I think that this is what I would like to express and to find as an editor and as a literary agent, in finding the young writers today who are going to express this. Because I think that India, the writing in India has come to, I would say, a certain comfort, a certain installment, which lacks the vigor and the bustling and the vibrant energy that one can find in Pakistani literature. And I think that this is what I would like to be able to represent and then to have translated in my own country.
Joya, what do you look for when you look for books to translate, publish in Italy?
Sorry?
What do you look for when you look at fiction that you would like to get translated and published in Italy?
Mm-hmm. Well, apart from my own taste and not considering the market, because then we would have to talk at length about the crisis and blah, blah. But, I mean, my personal taste, especially if I explore... This year I've been traveling since November, so I'm doubly lucky. I came here and... I started traveling in November because basically the more you travel, the more nice people start inviting you for workshops, and it was very interesting because I had a kind of a global view on a set of countries which are very close, but they don't really know each other, like Mr. Gandhiji was saying this morning, like you're very close, but you don't really know each other. But even countrymen, same country, you don't know each other anyway. But for me, if I go to a place like, let's say, Indonesia, where I spent about 2-3 weeks, I want to know more about, not only about the past, but first I want to know about the present. So, of course, it was very interesting this morning, the panel about the word of the novel. But we always have to keep in mind that we kind of don't know each other anyway, apart from cliches. Like, we are ignorant about so many things. So, like a country like Pakistan has so many cliches. Italy is made of cliches for readers. So if I tell you what Italy is really like, most people would be surprised because they have this image in mind of fantastic architecture and beautiful cities, which is very true, but, and there I can go on and on and on for hours about bad government, corruption. Here is the same. You have cliches like violence, and which is very true, but there's so many other layers, and literature can actually help us exploring that. So for me, an interesting novel to translate would be either very contemporary or something historical, but they can teach me something, because basically I'm ignorant and we can't know about so many other countries. Place like Indonesia, ask any, even here in the public, in Italy, I would ask my friends, what do you know about Indonesia? And they would go, Bali, beaches. I said, yes, and more, and well-read people. So for me to actually go there and realize that there's amazing literature in translation, because some people can write in English, some other people write in Bahasa, for instance, and then have wonderful translators that, help us bridging this gap, because we can't know all the languages. So I was able to read at least a couple of very interesting books, not only about the massacres in 65, 66, but I have now a wider perspective on Indonesia as a whole, which is still very small, but, Okay,
thank you. When you hire a translator, or when you begin a translation project, especially on a work from a country like Pakistan, where so many of the references in these novels are immediately available and accessible to a Pakistani readership, but not necessarily to an Italian or to a French readership. How do you handle that? How do translators work with those kinds of issues of reference and issues of connotation in the novels themselves?
Well, there is a debate, for instance, in France about the fact that some readers will say that a Pakistani author or an Indian author writing in English is not authentic enough for them, because they think that the English language is something more political than actually cultural. And I dare say that, and I try to explain that very often in lectures and in introducing and in conversation with my authors, that the English that is used by Pakistani and by Indian authors today is an English that is, I would say, made to encompass the complexity of countries like India and like Pakistan. So you cannot use the same English, the same Shakespeare English, if I may say, to write about the huge noise, craziness, and passion of cities like Karachi or Bombay. You have to adapt the English language to that. Therefore, what Salman once called the chutnification of the novel in his foreword in 1987 to Minhaj's Children, is correct. But I will go even further. Is that in fact the best language to write in, to represent and to translate a country and a culture, and I've always tried to publish writers who write from the flesh of a country, who write against the flesh of a country. In that, I always privileged writers in Pakistan and in India as opposed to the diaspora. I think that the English language that comes out of that is a language which is full of Urdu, which is full of Hindi, or Marathi or Malayalam in English. I mean in India, but with the purpose of coming the closest to the flesh of the culture and the country that the writer is talking about. And when I therefore publish a novel like that, and I choose the translator, I make sure that the translator is not in a way the odd classical translator from the classical English of the classical Shakespeare. I will definitely try to find someone who is able to do some research into these new Anglo-Indian and Anglo-Pakistani languages, which are, I would say, the heart of the energy of the language for me in writing. So it makes our tasks, we publishers, agents, and editors, a bit more complex. But I mean, at the end of the day, the result is just incredible because this mosaic of languages in a novel will come out in another mosaic in the target language, in other words, in French or in Italian, and this is the real challenge for me.
And that, of course, goes back to the quality of translation, because translating is more or less translating, imagine a landscape. So when I'm asked by students, like, how do I transfer the culture of a place into another language, which is a big question, and many people, well, before me, like Benjamin, answered very well. Like, we're like creating an echo more than anything else. So if a translator is experienced enough, because I've been translating, like let's say 50% of my translations are basically Indian writers writing in English, but I also translated American writers and Irish writers and Welsh writers. And whenever I was working on something new, like for instance, I remember years back I translated 2 Welsh writers, and I asked the publisher if you could arrange a residency for me to be in Wales for 2-3 months, because I wanted to see the country. So of course, anyone can translate very well without having been in a place, but it helps. I mean, if you know the country fairly well, it helps. And also, I mean, it's a matter of training, and it's a real profession. So that comes naturally if somebody is trained to work with language, and you know, it's very artisanal, like it's a craftsmanship. So for us, it comes natural to become bridges. So it's like ventriloquists. So we don't really think about maybe the big issues like culture. We just get there, and we know how to navigate. Like, you know, like navigation, like mapping. I had this workshop in Lahore a few days ago, and I realized the title of my workshop was Translation as Map Making, because we have to create maps.
In your experience, Bina, do you think that the work that has been translated, has it been true to your intent, to your understanding of your work?
Well, the truth is I have no way of knowing.
Yes.
Because I don't speak Italian. If it had been translated into French, which I speak, I could be able to give you a better idea. But I feel that I need to meet my translator and give him a big kiss, because it was his work, truly his work, that made the book into what it is in Italian. And really a translator is a translator but also a writer at the same time. If a translator is not a good writer, even if they are perfect in both languages, if they can't write with beauty and with poetry and with passion, it doesn't matter how good my book was, but it won't work. So the translator's role is so important, so important. I can't tell you how important it is. I almost feel like the translator should be co-author with my book, because that is how important it is. But I also want to show you something very funny. This is the book in Italian. And the book is called Slum Child in English, but in Italian it is called La bambina che non poteva sognare, which means the little girl who could not dream. When I saw this title, I was like, why? What does that even mean? And then the other thing that they did was to put this. They showed me a couple of different pictures of different covers. And again, I'm only telling you this because all of these things, all of these elements are absolutely vital to the success of a book. The title, the cover, what it looks like, the blurb in the back. So really I had no control. You have control over it when it's going on in English sometimes, depending on your publisher and how much input they want from you. If they're nice, they'll ask you what you think. Only if they're nice. Otherwise, they don't care. I had no way of controlling what this was going to be called, what it was going to look like, and they put this picture of this very sad but cute little poor girl in rags. And I trusted them, even though I might have said, well, this is very patronizing, although it's about a girl in a slum, so yes, in that case it's accurate. But the first version they sent me was a Pathan girl, blue-eyed and very blonde. And this takes place in Karachi. And she's not a Pathan girl. She's a Punjabi Christian, growing up in a Christian slum, very much like Isa Nagri. So I had to very much trust what they knew of what would sell and what would appeal to the average Italian reader. And it isn't a tale of woe, and it's a tale of survival and triumph and the will to succeed. And yet they could have so easily emphasized the misery, the poverty, the wretchedness, and turned this into a kind of a misery novel about Pakistan. They didn't do that. In everything, in every press release, in every whatever text that they wrote for the website, it was all about her will to survive, her passion, her innocence, all those things that I brought out in the book. So I was extremely grateful that they got that and then they expressed it. And that is what I think made it succeed.
The title is definitely it's completely crucial. It's the first thing that the reader sees on the table of a bookstore, but it's the last thing that we actually translate or that we decide to translate. And sometimes there are quite a few surprises. For instance, if I take Camilla Shamsi's Burned Shadows, I gave it a title that has nothing to do. In French, it's Quand blanchit le monde, which means when the world goes white. And it has to do, of course, as for you who read this extraordinary novel. It happens in Nagasaki in 1945 and starts with the atomic bomb, and the world definitely goes white. But then on the other hand, when I published Manto, I actually translated, not myself unfortunately, but I had Manto translated from the Urdu directly into French, which had never been done before. And the title I gave, because I published 24 of his short stories, I called the collection Toba Tek Singh and Other Stories. And so the French said, Toba Tek Singh, what is Toba Tek Singh? So I said, it created a kind of an event and a stir that we, publishers, feed on, because the more event and the more stir that you can actually create around a book is a guarantee of the book being read, let not being a success even.
Just a little anecdote, which was kind of funny years ago, not for the author, but just I mean, we have no say, as translators, we have no say about the cover. You know, basically we deliver this like 300 or 400 pages, and then I can imagine the shock of the writer, because it is the same shock that we have. Some publishers do ask, especially those who have been working for many years, they do ask for a suggestion for a title. But then it's the marketing committee or whatever, some editorial committee that actually chooses the title and the cover. So this very good friend of mine, I was translating Altaf Taherwala, who is a very talented young writer that was, I think his first book was published when he was 27, and it was a book about Bombay, very contemporary, very angry book, kind of gloomy book as well, but very interesting, because it was going totally against the cliches that we had about India, you know, like spices and exotic sceneries and all that. So basically it was an angry man in Bombay, especially being a Muslim in Bombay. It's kind of hard. You have to live in a special areas and blah blah. So when the book came out, they sent us, because I've been working for many years with their publishers, so they sent us a few images for the covers, and we thought the one was wonderful, and we said, I mean, Altaf also sent me those pictures, and we went for one. And then, of course, they chose another one. And there was this very exotic India color of a woman in a sari walking past a big billboard of Shah Rukh Khan. So Bollywood all over. And Altaf Skype and said, what happened? And I have no idea. And I said, I have no control, because he hadn't signed anything with his agent. The title was a literary translation, so that was okay. But basically it was a book, let's say, dark Bombay, and there you had Bollywood. So, of course, the publisher thought it would sell more, but for him it was a big shock.
But just to add to this, this actually happens in English as well. So not just across languages, but when a book moves from England to the U.S., right? Titles change, the back cover changes, the front cover changes, the blurbs change, the description changes. And I used to be a book editor actually at HarperCollins, and I used to be one of the people in charge of writing the flap copy of the hardcover books. And we used to have to rewrite everything that came from England, literally rewrite it, because for an American audience it would make no sense. So even from English to English it changes.
So in other words, the globalized literature has a limit. Isn't that nice when you think of it?
I'd like to open the floor for questions. If there are any?
Can I just say one thing?
Yes, please.
In that I wish that I had brought my second novel that was translated in Italian, because this one looks like this, and the second one has a picture of a very poor, sad little boy in rags, also a patan. And the title is Il bambino che credeva nella libertà, the boy who believed in liberty, which has nothing to do with the title of the book. So I could see it was the marketing department at work here.
But it's true that it poses another, and I'm sorry, I'm just going to add this with an editorial point of view. But once the author has done his share of creativity, of courageousness, of courage, of writing actually his or her work, and the book has actually gone through the hands of an agent and then the hands of a publisher, the question I ask is does the book still belong to the author? I know it's a huge question, but I mean, it now belongs to as many readers as possible. And aren't we supposed to actually pass on this text to the readers, knowing what the readers will actually hook onto? And I think it's our responsibility then to do that. So, yeah.
Thank you. Questions?
Okay, thank you. My name is Mariam Abu Zahar. I'm French. It's all very well that you translate from English into French. Fine. I have nothing against that. I wouldn't say it's not authentic at all. Although I have some...
We can't hear you.
We're having difficulty hearing.
Can you hear me better like that? Yeah, okay. I say I have nothing against the fact for translating from English into French. It's not a question of authenticity or not, although some of the writers are married to foreigners or living abroad, are they really Pakistani or not? I mean, you can ask the question. The problem is, you don't translate from local languages. I myself did translate short stories from Naya Massoud from Urdu into French. I met him in Lucknow and I enjoyed the translation very much. Well, there was no review in the French press, nothing at all, because people were not interested. While you can translate anything you like from Bengali or Hindi and all, there's a market for that. And here in Pakistan, you give a prize to a novel, a French prize to a novel written in English. While where is Urdu? We all spend our time complaining about the decline of Urdu. And there are so many people writing in Pashto, in Siraiki, in Sindhi. You know, they deserve to be translated. Okay, because from English, it's so easy, everybody would do it anyway. So it has to be focused more on the local languages, and particularly on Urdu.
But you're talking about the resonance of these texts once they're translated in the Western press. Is this what you're talking about?
No, it's not the resonance. I said it's very good you translate from English to French.
No, because even the English, because there's such a crisis right now in the West about the pages in magazines or elsewhere or whatever dedicated to literature today.
Sure.
That there's even a rarification, I would say, of pages in magazines dedicated to books, English or Urdu or Malayalam or Bengali. So I think that the real problem today is how you get readers to know about these texts.
And that's what I mean, because when I did that translation, there was absolutely no review at all in the press, no interest at all.
But I had actually started out by saying that in France, unfortunately, the problems that I have encountered with my Pakistani writers has been the reluctance. I would say the negativity of the image of Pakistan
exactly.
in the French readerships, which made it very difficult for me to be able to pass on the quality of this writing, whether it's from the Urdu, the Sindhi, or the Pakistani English. It also has a problem to do with the reception of the languages in our country. Also,
it's exactly what I meant.
Yeah.
Although
this I cannot control.
Can I just add? In Italy, I think it went slightly differently because not only the case of Binasha, but nowadays with the crisis, it's difficult to sell. I mean, publishers find it difficult to sell anything. So where there is a translation or something in English. But the other major problem is in the case of Marc. He translated Manto from Urdu into French, which is a feat. In Italy, there's nobody that can work from Urdu into Italian. So maybe in the future we might find an enlightened publisher that publishes Manto from the English translation, because we don't have we can. I mean, I can't see in the near future somebody being able to translate all the collection that he did from Urdu, because we don't have very good translators. I mean, you can't have academics translating that. I mean, not only academics. And universities, I mean, they hardly produce translators from Hindi. I mean, in Hindi we had 2 books translated. From Chinese, Japanese, that works now. But there are languages like Bengali literature is amazing. there is a fantastic, especially one fantastic translator from Bengali into English called Arunava Singh, who is a friend, and he made translation kind of sexy in a way because he's a very cool guy. He tweets about translation. So, I mean, we can, in Italy, for instance, it's very difficult to find a translator that works from Bengali into Italian. Where is it taught? And if you find somebody who tells you if the translation is good, because, I mean, really, that's another huge issue. Professional translators, I mean, you have to acquire experiences. You have to translate like 20, 30. It's not one book that makes you a translator. So creating a culture, even here, you have to create a culture where you start teaching translation courses. Not, I mean, weekends are fine, master classes are wonderful, but it has to go on for at least minimum a year to give you an idea of how it is to work on a text. So it's usually a problem of finding translators numerically. In India has maybe 10, I was talking with Arunava, there's 10 people in India that can work professionally from 6 languages. 10 in India. So
but it is really our responsibility to be able to find translators who will translate Manto from the Urdu. Because you see, when you translate Manto from the English, and I know a very good translation from the Urdu into English for Manto, but when you translate Manto from the English, who was translated from the Urdu into English, it's what you call a double translation. Yeah. And when it's a double translation, you lose more than double in it.
Amir Hussain, the writer, I think 2 years ago at this very festival, specifically said that it is easier to translate from Urdu into Romance languages than it is to translate from Urdu into English. And he actually has translated Ghalib both into Italian and French. And he lives in England. I don't know whether he's here this year. I don't think he's here this year. No. And he does this regularly, but he primarily focuses on poetry. So.
And also the marketing of translated text in some countries, like in India, for instance, Kartika, that we know very well, she's the editor of HarperCollins. She was saying you can't imagine how many meetings we work on the marketing strategies for translated text, because readers think, it's translated, I don't really like this, I'll buy an English. That's what she told me like a couple of weeks ago. We had lunch with Arunava, and she was saying there is a problem, not only in India, I'm sure in some other countries, of translated text. In Italy, we are used to translation. We translate 25% of our books. France is more or less that. So it's also a matter of marketing and how to find a strategy to make translation
viable.
Yes, accessible and
affordable.
Affordable.
Yeah.
Okay. It is wonderful to know about the interest that the Pakistani writers and the books have generated in Europe. But the question is this interest limited only to the grave issues of this region, like the drone attacks or maybe the women abuse and stuff like that? Or is the European public ready to read, or they're interested in reading about the day-to-day issues or the simple life and the interesting culture and everything about this region? So this is my question. That means actually I'm into writing and I need to know, should I write about only the grave issues or can I write about a simple daily life of a simple family? Is it possible?
You know, I think that the greatest novels in the world are the greatest because they come out of the experience of the writer. And I think that when you write, you have to be in touch with the world. And you have to be in touch with your own world. Because the act of writing is actually a very courageous act of going down into yourself. And if you take Manto for me is the writer of the people. And this is exactly what I try to pass on in France. but all the people, because Manto was quoted a subversive writer even in Pakistan, and you know very well why. And this, nevertheless, is what I try to pass on. So yes, definitely, continue writing and writing about the people, because this is what makes the good novels and the good short stories, or the good nonfiction, actually.
If I can add a few words to that, I tried to think very hard about what it was about this book that was so beloved in Italy. And at first I thought it must be because it's a Catholic country and the protagonist is a Catholic girl. And so there's some relatability, perhaps the readers there, because I actually stumbled upon, people arguing about some of the religious things that were written in the book. Oh, the Bible says this, but the Quran says this. Which is right? What's going on? So I think that it was an unexpected vein that was tapped. But when I set out to write this book, I didn't think I'm going to write a book about a Christian so that people in nominally Christian countries will buy this book. Not at all. What I thought was that I want to write about the way minorities are treated in Pakistan. And I want to write something that's very honest and very true, even if it's difficult to hear. And believe me, I get into trouble with Pakistani readers who really get upset and they tell me, why are you showing such a bad side of our country? This isn't true at all. We're fine with our minorities. We treat them very well. 2 years ago, today, nobody can really say that with a straight face. So the answer is that, well, I know that I haven't written the greatest novel in the world. This is not the greatest novel in the world, but it's the greatest novel that I could write. And except the next one will be greater. But you have to write what is so important to you that even if it's a quiet book or if it's a daily issue, it's the biggest thing in your world. You as the writer should look at it like that and forget about who wants to read it and who doesn't want to read, right? That's not important when you're writing your book. Tell your truth, tell your story, and be honest. That's all I can say.
Yeah, it's coming.
I have a question about a slightly different sort of translation, which is just within the English language. So I'm Canadian, and I've heard, that if you're going to be published in, let's say, the States, someone at some point might ask you to sort of change the language around a little bit, or maybe for the UK. I mean, do you guys know much about this? And what you were saying earlier about, as the author, I have no control over the title and the image on my book. As an author, do I have any control over that aspect of things? And is this something I should fight for? Or, like you were saying, trust the publisher that they know what they're doing?
Unfortunately, there is something as editorial censorship, especially in the States. I completely agree with you. One has to be very, very careful. I have published an American writer, Amanda Ward, not to mention her name, who actually wrote a certain manuscript, and when she actually got the galleys, whole chunks had disappeared. And that was because she was known, quoted, as a certain type of writing, a writer writing about family issues, and everything that had nothing to do with quoted family issues was to be ousted, and it has been ousted, and the result was that she did not find the novel that she had written at first when she received it. So yes, this exists, and you have to be careful.
One more question? Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you to our panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.